But let's get you ready for tonight's NBA draft. A guy who I consider a personal friend and someone who does an unbelievable job at evaluating basketball players for a living is Adam Finkelstein. He joins us. He's director of scouting for 24/7 Sports. He's college basketball insider for CBS Sports HQ. And I mean, Adam's work goes back to when so many of these guys were high school players or international players, and he evaluates all of them. And so many of them either didn't really play in college basketball or are international players. We may never know them until they play in an NBA uniform. Adam, why is the narrative that this year's NBA draft is so down?
Well, I think it's somewhat fair, to be honest. There's a lack of star power at the top, and that's not just a talking point. That's something that executives have verified, and you can also see it, quite frankly, by the amount of teams who still, at this hour, some just 7 hours before this starts, are very open to trading down in this draft. That starts with the first overall pick in the draft. It includes the third pick, the fourth pick. I mean, there's a lot of people who would be very happy to move off the high picks and in exchange for multiple assets, and that is not typically the case in most years. So I think that's really the best piece of evidence that we can show to say, like, hey, there just isn't that obvious star power at the top.
Okay, so who is at the top? If you were drafting, who would be your first pick?
Well, I would trade the pick. I think there's a few different players in play here. I think right now the most likely candidate is Zachary Rissache, 6'9" Frenchman, who's gotten a lot better in the last year. I mean, Doug, this is someone who played at the Nike Hoop Summit last spring, week after McDonald's All-American game, and really, really struggled. But he has come back in a big way. 6'9", wing, forward, 3-4, 4-3 type, who shoots the ball really well, is credited for being a plus defender. Just doesn't have that alpha level playmaking that you typically associate with the top overall pick in the draft. But I think there's a lot of 3-and-D outcomes. And on the heels of Mikal Bridges getting, I don't know, what do they get, 6 first-round picks for him? I mean, that archetype has never been more valuable. So I think that's what people see in Rissache. The other one who I think would have been an option is Alex Sarr. He's not going to be taken by Atlanta tonight because he didn't want to work out for them. But a few weeks ago, he was the betting favorite. He is also from France, so history is going to be made tonight. We're very possible the first 2 picks are both from France. Of course, Wemby from France last year, the number 1 overall pick. Sarr is a mobile 7-footer who's got a ton of defensive upside. People compare him to, like, Evan Mobley. But physically, he's got a long way to go. He's pretty lean. Offensively, he's also a work in progress. So, again, not typically what you associate with a first or second pick in the draft. In most years, these guys go somewhere between 5 and 10.
Now, Sarr and Rissache, they don't get along, right?
You know, I don't know that. That's interesting. I had not heard that.
I thought they didn't get along. What is Sarr's deal with Atlanta? Why? I mean, I've heard very few people ever say, "Hey, you know where I don't want to go is Atlanta," especially a French player. Why?
Well, and how about saying, "Hey, the Wizards look great. Send me there." I mean, you know, like it's very like Bill Ryder said yesterday on our show. It's very Kyle Kuzma of him. But yeah, I mean, he basically just dictated that Washington is where he wants to be. I'll say this: the Wizards' path is much more clear. I mean, they're bad. They weren't last in the NBA last year, but you could make the argument that they were the farthest away from being a contender. I think they probably only have 3 players on the entire roster who they see as part of their long-term plans. Sarr goes in, and he knows he's the guy in the front court. So he's going to have the opportunity to play through mistakes, to get the offensive volume, to develop his game. They know they're not going to be a contender next year. They're going to be willing to allow him to have those growing pains. In Atlanta, the identity is a little more convoluted. Is Trae Young getting traded? Is DeJounte Murray getting traded? They've already sold off a lot of future draft picks in that DeJounte Murray deal, so they can't totally hit the reset button. And yet they were 10 games under 500 and now in the luxury tax too. So there was, this is speculative, but there was certainly there are more unknowns in Atlanta than there are Washington.
That's fair enough. Where are you on Reed Sheppard? Reed Sheppard, a guy who had a tremendous year for Kentucky. Obviously, his dad, Jeff, was part of the national championship team. Um, you know, his mom played as well. I mean, he's really good, but I don't know, top five for a
Yeah.
6'2" combo guard? I don't know.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, like Houston, I think Houston at 3 is a definite candidate to trade that pick. There's a lot of people trying to trade up to grab Donovan Clingan at 3. But if they keep the pick, the intel has been pretty consistent that Sheppard is the guy they like. And so, again, preface this by saying doesn't go 3 in a typical draft, but statistically speaking, one of the best shooters we've seen coming out of college basketball in something like 30 years, 52% from the three-point line. Now, as you mentioned, having watched these guys in high school, I can tell you that is nothing like what we saw in high school. He was a career 33% three-point shooter in high school in the games that were tracked by Synergy Sports, which is about half of them, but certainly nowhere near. I mean, this was beyond anything we could have anticipated. People have asked me, why does that matter, what he shot in high school? And my answer is for the same reason it mattered what Jabari Smith shot from 3 in high school, because sometimes one season of college is the outlier. It's not the norm, but it can happen. And I'm kind of with you. I mean, listen, I was wrong on Reed Sheppard. He was way better, obviously, than I and anyone who saw him in high school predicted, but I still think he's kind of a role player extraordinaire. I'm not sure that there are star outcomes, but for a team like Houston, and now we're seeing them, they're apparently going to be very active in the trade market. But if they keep that pick and they're looking for somebody who can be a Fred VanVleet understudy for a couple of years and then maybe take over when VanVleet becomes a free agent 2 years from now, potentially partner with Jalen Green, potentially partner with Amen Thompson, I get the fit. I think the key for any of these teams is you have to try and forget about the typical return on the number 3 pick in a normal year, because this is not a normal year.
It's a great point, right? It's a great point. Like, yes, you would like to get a more talented player with more upside, but they just simply do not exist. Okay, like, I think there's other interesting guys. I think Rob Dillingham could be exactly what he was at Kentucky in the NBA. And for people who didn't watch Kentucky this year, off the bench, just a scoring machine, right? The Jamal Crawford sort of role. I actually think that of the things that John Calipari did in his final season at Kentucky, that was the best one, because it's a role. It's literally setting him up for success, because he has to do nothing different other than guard a little bit better, and he can have that same role in the NBA.
He can. I mean, he's 160 pounds, so that's a problem. And defensively, I'll say this: he's. I mean, I'll just say it plainly. He's a bad defender. So it's really, beauty is in the eye of the beholder here, because I say both of those things, and at the same time, he may be the most dynamic guy with the ball in his hands in this draft. Like, if you're looking for somebody who you can put the ball in his hands and say, go get me a bucket, if you want to simplify it to that degree, he's probably one of the first guys you bring up. So I think that where he ends up is going to be really important, because he's got to be in a locker room where, the professionalism is going to be emphasized on a day-to-day basis. Like, hey, being completely non-competitive defensively, that's not an option anymore. Like, not getting in the weight room, that's not an option anymore. All the things that go along with being a professional and maximizing what you have. Like, so I think, I've heard some buzz about, like, maybe Miami likes him. Miami thinks, like, their culture can really be good for him. I think that would be ideal for him. Send him down there, and if he doesn't conform, somebody's, literally or figuratively going to punch him in the face until he buys in. And if he buys into a winning culture like that, I think there's some really high outcomes for him.
What's your eval of Bronny James?
I think that out of high school, we were one of the few that weren't perpetuating that one and done lottery pick narrative that so many outlets are trying to pretend they weren't saying a year ago. He was a top 40 guy for us at the end. When he was picked for the McDonald's All-American game, he was ranked in a spot where that should not have been an outcome. But I will say that in that setting and at the Hoop Summit, he, to his credit, looked like he belonged. So it wasn't egregious in that setting. You know, he made enough shots. He showed the athleticism. But to me, the only reason we're having this conversation is because he's LeBron James's son. I think that's pretty obvious at this point. Almost as obvious as that he's going to go to the Lakers at 55. The only caveat to that is unless they trade up and just make sure there's no surprises given LeBron's free agency. But this is a player who I actually think it isn't impossible that he becomes a serviceable NBA player down the road given the opportunity that he is going to have to grow into that. But if it weren't for his father, we would not be talking about him as an NBA prospect right now.
I agree, and I don't understand. I don't get it. I understand. I really don't understand what Rich Paul's trying to do with this. You know, Toronto likes him and Dallas. Like, stop it. Like, what are we doing? It's really a one team race. And then he says, we're not going to do a two-way contract. What do you mean you're not going to do a two-way contract? Like, you know, I don't
doing
get
that to make
any
sure nobody else takes him. Like, it's like, hey, nobody. We're not.
Why would you want no one else to take him?
Because LeBron has told us for 3 years now. Like, he said the last thing he wants to accomplish is to play with his son. He said it repeatedly. Oh, and including like this past winter. Now they've tried to move that goalpost.
They tried to move off of that. Well, it's not about playing together. Like, what are we doing?
Of course it is. Everything you're doing is about getting them together. From you not allowing him to work out, from you saying he's not going to sign a two-way contract. And by the way, the only other team he worked out for is a team that very literally cannot draft a prospect. Like, if there is one team in the NBA that needs a plug-and-play rotation player now, or needs maybe three of them, it's Phoenix. So the fact that was the only other team that they worked out for, I just thought was somewhat comical, because there's not another team that makes less sense to draft a developmental guard who's not going to be able to help you for a long time. Like, he's going to be on the Lakers, and the reason he's going to be on the Lakers is because that's what LeBron wants. And I'm not trying to give anybody like a soundbite. Like, that's just what I believe. Like, the man has the leverage to pull it off.
Yes. Okay. So, and you can speak to this. He's not the first. He won't be the last, right? J.R. Smith's brother, famously on the G League team for the Knicks. We've talked about, Giannis's brothers both being, on the Bucks. And
Evan Mobley's brothers on the Cavs right now.
Right. And Mobley's brother can play some. I mean, maybe not that level, but Giannis's brothers couldn't play dead in a cowboy movie. So we've seen it before, but the drafting of it, the discussion, people putting him in the top 10 on prospect lists is just, it's like laughable, and I don't understand why.
We work in the media, though. That was strict clickbait. That's when you work for somebody, or you are, like I sent a tweet last year that got me ruffled some feathers, because I just, when our rankings came out, I said, like, credibility over clicks. Yeah. And thankfully, I work at a place where no one asks me to do that. No one asks me to, because I can tell you from the Google metrics, anything with Bronny in it is going to get a lot more hits than Alex Sarr, Donovan Clingan, or Zachary Rissache. Or, last year when we were ranking players, Ron Holland, Isaiah Collier, those guys. So, it helps from a metric standpoint. But fortunately, I've never been in a position where someone has asked me to do that sort of thing. But there were a lot of places that were saying, one and done lottery pick. And what was crazy, it was like some of these things happened like right after big events. I think it was like the Hoop Hall. He was 3 of 17 from the floor. And then like 2 days later, somebody's mock draft came out and he was a lottery pick. It's like, what are you talking about? Like this is just not based in reality. It just discredits you, I think. So I don't know. That's just my take on it.
Adam Finkelstein joining us, 24/7 Sports, covering all things basketball. He joins us. I'm Doug Gottlieb in for Colin. This is The Herd. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Will it come back to being more college heavy with the elimination of the G League Ignite next year?
So yes, but not just for that variable. The other variable is the rise of NIL and the consequent increased traction with international players. You can cite recent commitments at BYU and Illinois as example of this. Like, those are guys who are already being talked about as potential draft picks next year, who in the past probably wouldn't have come to play college basketball because, you know this, that can be a hard transition to go from an international game to a much more physical college game. So there can be some risk in that if you're just trying to protect your stock, but we're seeing players do that more now. So between that and Ignite going away, and the third variable there is OTE is no longer a college basketball competitor. It's basically another feeder system along with high school. So like the alternatives to college basketball are less and less appealing than they were a year, 2 year, 3 years ago, for sure.
Awesome stuff. Adam, just incredible insight and information. Look forward to seeing your work throughout the night and in tomorrow, recapping it. Thanks so much for being our guest in the Herd.